Mr. Menon, you had talked of the possibility of a conflict, maybe not a major conflict. Now, 3 weeks ago, the US signed a military pact with UK and Australia called AUKUS. Right? Do you see that as America's best shot at containing China? What is the significance of the AUKUS development?
Well, I see it as...
And this is military.
Yeah. I see it as an attempt to restore balance and therefore stability in the seas around China, through the Indo-Pacific, but particularly in the seas near China, South China Sea, East China Sea. And to that extent, if it restores the balance and prevents domination of these seas by any one particular party, any one country, one military, then, it's a good thing from an Indian point of view. Because for us, it's important that these seas stay open, that you can freely navigate them, use them for peaceful purposes, trade, etc. And I don't see how AUKUS goes against any of that. In fact, it helps to produce that kind of outcome, which we need. But it's only one small part of the larger security architecture that we're talking about, because China's problem is that she's contained by that first island chain, from Japan all the way through the Ryukyus, Taiwan, etc., all of which, Korea, basically these are all US allies. And at sea, she has the world's greatest armada 12 nautical miles off her coast in her face. And this is China's problem. She's trying to project naval power, military power at sea, and she's trying to learn to be a maritime power. And that's a transition that she still hasn't made. And it takes time to start thinking, because you can't think of the South China Sea the way you think territorially of Xinjiang. It's a different problem at sea. And so I think we're watching multiple transitions. China knows what she needs to do. But every time she does something, there is a pushback, there is a reaction. And AUKUS is a reaction to a Chinese build-up over the last 30 years, and this attempt to become a maritime power which goes beyond just the brown waters around her into the blue oceans.
Dr. Small, I want you to take up that question, but with an additional question that I have, which is we have seen the kind of aggression that China has shown in terms of what they call the gray zone war that it does with Taiwan regularly. They've been strafing their skies, pushing deep into their space, threatening them. We've seen what happened in Galwan Valley in India. Do you think this is also a potential conflict zone? Because you never know, as Mr. Menon was saying, that there could be a mistake. We read yesterday in the papers that a US nuclear sub, a foreign object had stuck on it. We don't know what it is. They haven't defined it. And US is also, as part of AUKUS, now going to supply nuclear-powered subs to Australia. So what is your sense? Is there, firstly, AUKUS a serious threat? Second, do you think there would be a smaller conflict, or who knows, a conflagration of a kind that we wouldn't want at this period?
So, AUKUS has two dimensions. One is the submarine deal, and the other that had less attention is a series of forms of cooperation on areas such as military artificial intelligence, defense industrial policy, other areas. And I think this is one of the things that's going on simultaneously. You're starting to get right now a series of states that are working together more actively in coalition with each other, that feel greater urgency about the need to do so, and that see this as well as a disadvantage for China. In the end, China by itself as a power, yes, is a peer competitor to the United States. The big edge that the US and its allies have is still that alliance network, that wider framework of partners and allies, which I think in the US mind will still, in principle, give it the preponderance of power if you're able to marshal those coalitions effectively. But I think the problem has been, until recently, there have been limitations on countries' willingness to move on certain fronts. The US, of course, hadn't moved as assertively against China as it has until recently. But Australia was very cautious, for instance. We saw that with the Quad, of course, classically as well. But the forms of coercion that Australia has experienced, which have not just been about the naval build-up that they've been seeing on the Chinese part. It's also the forms of economic coercion that they've experienced in the last period of time. And it's made countries willing to take certain steps that I think even a few years ago they wouldn't have been willing to contemplate. I'm not sure that that necessarily leads into dangerous conflagration risks. There are instances where that is absolutely the case, where Taiwan will tend to come very, very high up on that list. And that's not necessarily just risks of miscalculation, that's risks of very deliberate calculations on the Chinese side that say that they are, in certain circumstances, willing to take certain actions. We're seeing this certainly in the forms of intimidation that are taking place right now, the kind of psychological warfare that's being waged on Taiwan. But if not in the next couple of years, if not in the next 5 years, there is a real question as to whether China sees a set of conditions where it's simply willing to act. At least in that instance. And I'm in some ways more worried about that than I am about some of the accidents.